Any questions? Okay, let's move on. That feels like plenty of time for someone to raise their hand, but that's not what the students need to do. You still get questions if you only do 2 seconds, but it's from the students who know they have a question, know they want to ask it, and they're waiting for any break and their hand is going to shoot up.
Let's talk about the 8-second rule.
Okay. The 8-second rule was actually the first small change that I made. I was used to being in classes, presenting something, asking for questions, nobody responds. So I go on thinking, okay, there's no questions. And somewhere I ran across the 8-second rule. The 8-second rule is the idea that when you ask, are there any questions, it takes the students about 8 seconds to go through this process of deciding they're going to ask a question. The first one is, oh, do I have a question? Second one is, yes, there's something I was puzzled about. The third one is, can I turn that into a question that I can actually ask in class? And the fourth one is, am I willing to ask that question in front of all these people? And then the hand goes up. And there's some research that says that whole process takes a minimum of 8 seconds. I would be skeptical, except that the first day I tried it, I was up in front and I knew I'm a terrible judge of time. All of us are in front of a class. It seems to stretch forever. And in my head, I'm saying, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. I'm feeling like a fool. 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000. This is taking forever. 7, 1,000. And then a hand goes up. And what I found is really reliably, I get questions. Not all the time. Sometimes everything was clear. But 8 seconds really is that minimum. To this day, I still have to count in my head. I still start feeling like a fool after 7 seconds. And often a hand goes up right at that point. And they're good questions. They're probably better questions because once you've done it for a bit, your class knows they're going to have time to think about it. I've done lots of classroom observations where people said, I can't get my students to ask questions. And I can tell instantly because their wait time is 2 seconds. Any questions? Okay, let's move on. That feels like plenty of time for someone to raise their hand, but that's not what the students need to do. You still get questions if you only do 2 seconds, but it's from the students who know they have a question, know they want to ask it, and they're waiting for any break and their hand is going to shoot up because they've already gone through those first 4 steps. So just implementing that change, it doesn't take any assessment. It doesn't require anything other than to do the 8-second rule. I have often told my students about the 8-second rule. Sometimes I feel like I'm in front of 120 people and they're all wondering why I'm not saying anything. And so I'll just say, I use the 8-second rule for questions. I'm counting in my head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, whatever. And the students are lightly entertained by that. But then a lecture or 2 later, when I'm standing up there feeling like a fool, nobody's saying anything, I'll just say aloud, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, and it always gets a laugh.
Okay.
It doesn't always get a laugh. It always makes me amused. Gets back to the
target audience,
thing.
right?
Right.
Okay. Let's touch briefly on why do you think this works? Why does the 8-second rule work?
So a couple reasons. One is it gives students time to think about what you just went over. So even for the students who don't ask a question, which is usually most of them, you're making them reflect back on what you just covered. And anyone who takes it seriously and actually thinks, do I have a question, they have to do some retrieval practice. It is, on the surface, it's a really simple thing just designed to get questions. But in fact, it's a well-timed pause that gets students thinking and helps them integrate what they learned and helps them start making memory traces for it.
Yeah, and that's such a critical point for anybody who is thinking about trying this, is not to... I want to make sure that our listeners, our thousands of listeners, hear that you're not recommending after every single question in your class or every single pause in your class when you ask for questions, wait 8 seconds. What I've heard you talk about is doing that really intentionally and saying, okay, here's a point where I want my learners to pause and reflect on their learning, to start building some of those pathways for retrieval. And when they're doing that, I want to know if there are any misunderstandings or misapprehensions about the learning before we move on to the next point.
Yeah.
So strategically, I'm going to pause for questions at times when I want them to pause and reflect.
Right.
And I'm going to force myself to give enough wait time
Yes.
for that whole process to happen.
And for an instructor, it's really simple to choose those times. It's whenever you just finished one topic and you're about to start the next, or you've just hit some important point of whatever you're going through, and you're about to go to the next important point and build the rationale for that. So it's not hard to find good places to do it. Even so, even if you pick poor places, it still works. The students are still reflecting. They may not choose exactly what you wanted them to reflect on, but they're still thinking through the material.
So we hope you feel inspired to go out and change one thing in your teaching, and we want to hear from you. So please email us at stli@wm.edu. That's STLI@wm.edu if you would like to make an appearance here in Studio 36 or virtually in our virtual podcasting studio.